The call that changed everything and the scary mystery that came after my wife passed away. I'm Dylan, and it felt like my life ended 2 years ago. I used to think about the craziest, darkest stuff, but luckily I didn't go through with it. Maybe God was looking out for me. Back then I was working as an electrician, making pretty good and steady money, but I was busy with work all day long. My wife was a stay-at-home mom, and we had an 18-year-old daughter, Stella, who was studying accounting. I got a call from Stella's school while I was at work.
Hello, Mr. Brown. I'm Stella's advisor.
Yes, hello, ma'am.
I just called Vera a few minutes ago to talk about Stella's grades, sir. But there's one thing I think's more important. I heard some kind of fight or argument while your wife's phone was still on. I heard some yelling and then a voice, saying it was Vera, kept talking to me. But I don't think it was your wife. I called the police. Sorry, I just remembered to call you now.
I had saved my daughter's advisor's number, so I was sure the call wasn't a scam. Feeling anxious and unsure, I immediately called home, but neither my wife nor my daughter picked up, even though the phone was still ringing. I quickly asked the manager if I could leave work early, and then my phone suddenly rang. I was hoping it'd be my wife or daughter calling back to say everything was okay, but it was the police.
Hey, Mr. Brown, we're the local cops, and we're outside your house. We need you to come home right away.
I knew something was up, so I kept praying all the way home. I hoped that when I got home, my wife and daughter would be there to greet me like usual. But that time, it didn't happen. In front of my house, there were 2 police cars and an ambulance with almost a dozen police and medical staff. My daughter Stella was on the ground crying. I ran over to hug my daughter, and Stella cried even harder.
Dad, help Mom. The intruder. There was so much blood on the floor. Please.
Stella couldn't hold it together, and I'd never seen her so scared before. I held her tight while I talked with the police about what was going on. We got a call from your daughter's teacher saying there was a big fight in the family. When we got here, we saw your wife lying on the floor with a lot of blood. As soon as I heard that, I rushed into the house, but the policeman stopped me. Just stay calm. We've given your wife first aid and need to keep the scene clear. I broke down in tears when I found out what was happening. The police kept asking Stella about everything she'd seen.
Someone broke the window. They had a knife and...
Stella couldn't keep going, just sobbing and shaking. I hugged her tight. Seeing that Stella was getting worse, the police quickly took her to the hospital. A few minutes later, they brought my wife out of the house in really bad shape. The stretcher my wife was on was almost totally covered in blood, and she had a bunch of big cuts, especially on her head and face. I just collapsed when I saw that. A few hours ago, my family and I were happily having breakfast together, and now I'm dealing with watching my wife and kids in pain. Mr. Brown, we'll find you another place to stay until the investigation's done. The next 2 days felt like a nightmare for me. My daughter couldn't talk. She just kept crying and was really panicked. My wife was in the ER and ICU, and they weren't letting anyone in. I couldn't remember the last time I ate, but I wasn't even hungry. By the morning of the 3rd day, the police called me to the station to talk about the investigation. Mr. Brown, we're sorry to let you know this. Your wife passed away a few minutes ago. It felt like my heart was being crushed. I had this sharp pain in my chest, and it was super hard to breathe. Second, it looks like your daughter might have killed your wife." I instantly broke down in tears. My life felt like it was falling apart. The police brought out a bunch of evidence from the investigation. First, they talked about the relationship between my wife and daughter. They'd been having a major conflict for the past few months. The day it all went down was when my wife got a call from the school saying Stella had been suspended for almost 2 months because of a bunch of scandals. My wife couldn't handle the phone call and immediately started grilling Stella. Stella, the daughter I always expected and trusted, had been living a wild lifestyle. A bunch of times, my wife would sneak off to the police station to bail Stella out whenever she got into trouble or fights. And it was my daughter who, during all the conflict and drama, grabbed a knife from the kitchen and... Stella, realizing how serious things were, made up a fake scene by smashing the glass door and messing up the living room. I cried and broke down a lot. If I should have paid more attention to my family, maybe this heartbreaking stuff wouldn't have happened. On the day of the trial, I watched my daughter get sentenced and taken away. I can't even put into words how I felt at that moment. She was an adult and had to own up to what she did. For the next year, I looked really skinny. I looked like I was 70, even though I was only 55. Now my life settled down. I'm back to work, involved in a bunch of volunteer projects, and hanging out with more friends my age. On March 3rd, 2024, around noon, a teacher from the Student Affairs Office at Mount Union University in Ohio called a student's parents to let them know their 19-year-old daughter got suspended because she'd failed a bunch of classes. The teacher then heard a heated argument and a lot of shouting. The call dropped, and after a few callbacks, someone finally picked up and said they were the student's parent. Seeing something weird, the teacher called the police to check things out, and a horrifying story that ended tragically for a family came to light.
What happened?
Your wife and daughter got into an argument.
She's going to jail forever. Wife's dead. I was too.